Hi, this is Sarit Switzer, and welcome to the It Is Taught podcast, a podcast devoted to the teachings of Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi as recorded in his most famous work, the Tanya. My hope for this show is to make these teachings accessible and relatable to the average person, regardless of prior Jewish education or affiliation. The episodes follow the prescribed daily study portions and are meant to serve as practical lessons in how to live your life as your true self and develop an authentic and powerful relationship with your Creator. I have personally experienced the effects the study of this work has had on me, and I'm excited to share what I can of this knowledge with you. So please join me on this journey of learning, self-growth, and connection with your source. Hi, and welcome to the It Is Taught podcast. This is episode 732 for the 10th of Kislev in a regular year. So pretty recently on the podcast, we spoke about our total and utter dependence upon food and how really this points to our frailty as human beings. And we spoke about the idea that this is because the source of food, the source of things that we eat, actually has a higher spiritual force than our own. We spoke about the idea that, the mineral life, the plant life, all of these things, all of physicality actually are coming from the fallen sparks, the 288 fallen sparks from the breaking of the vessels, which are ultimately sourced in this high place, this high name of God called Sag. Whereas our souls come from the name Ma, which is a lower level, albeit a more rectified level. Today, we're going to talk about water. Water, even more than food, is something that we really depend on. So, intermittent fasting, we've spoken about that as well. Even people who do these prolonged fasts, it's rare that you'll find somebody do a water fast as well, where they will fast from water. Usually when you're hearing about these longer fasts, they're still drinking water. Water is one of those things that we really is very, very, very essential to life. And so with that being said, I think it's interesting that in today's Tanya, as we'll see, the Alter Rebbe brings up water as an analogy for Torah, which is a very apt analogy, and it's an analogy that's often used throughout Judaism, is this analogy of Torah with water. One of the reasons why water is used as an analogy for Torah, which is what the Alter Rebbe is going to focus on today, is the idea that water is a very powerful substance in that it can go from a very high place to a low place and get into different crevices and stuff like that, and it doesn't change. Even if the water gets dirty, let's say, or something like that, there are always ways to purify it, to filter it, to clarify it, and things like that. Essentially, the water itself passes through everywhere. This is why, let's say, if you have a water bottle, you want to make sure that it's really, really so tight, because even the smallest little crack, in the cup or the water bottle or whatever, the water will get through that. The water can get through the most minuscule of all cups. And this is how Torah works. Torah is ultimately God's wisdom and God's will. And God's wisdom and God's will is what vivifies the entire world that we're living in. And while we've spoken about this, that, the source of the entire world that we live in is God's wisdom, for most things in our reality, this wisdom had to go through many concealments. We spoke about these tzimtzumim, right? And how it came about through speech, how creation, for the most part, came about through God's speech, which involved a lot of contractions and concealments of this wisdom. However, there's one channel through which God's wisdom did not get concealed in the same manner as everything else in creation, and that's the Torah. The Torah is the one thing that we have that is sort of like the purified version of God's wisdom that God as a gift gave us to access. And this is why the Torah is likened to water. Now, what's curious about this Torah is that Torah is something which we access through our minds, right? It's something that we study. And ultimately, the purpose of the learning Torah, especially if we're learning about the laws of Torah, is for us to practice these laws and do these laws with our physical bodies. Now, there's a little bit of a problem here. There's a little bit of an issue. What's that? The issue is that our minds and our bodies are not Torah. Our minds and our bodies are limited in nature. They are creations. They do fall into this category of things that God created through his speech, right? So what happens then? Does the Torah get compromised in that sense when we learn it or when we do the laws? Does it remain the same? What's the story? What's actually happening? So this is what we're going to be exploring today, is this relationship between Torah and what happens to the Torah when it descends down here into our world, and how we relate to it when we study it. And how does the study of Torah differ, by the way, this is another big topic that's going to be addressed, between our love and fear of God. Because our love and fear of God are also subjective experiences that happen through our intellects, that they happen as a result of our intellects. Even if we're having an emotional experience where we love and fear God, that is our emotions are usually generated by our thoughts, by our intellect. So what's the difference? One, we learn Torah with our subjective minds, and we love God with our subjective minds, right? So what's the difference? So in short, we'll get into the way that Alter Rebbe explains it soon. But in short, the way to understand it is that when we learn Torah, what we're doing is we're accessing the source of this water, so to speak, this downward flow of energy, this downward flow of the source. We're receiving nourishment from that source, from that water. And when we have this this love and fear of God, when we're experiencing this love and fear of God, what we're doing in that case is we're actually being nourished by the water. It's like we're drinking from the water, which is a different kind of experience, right? So it's sort of like, if you think about it, let's say you have an ocean, like a big body of water that's like the source for many rivers and lakes and things like that. And it depends kind of on your orientation. Like, are you in a state of receptivity of the ocean and of the source of the ocean, and like sort of like you're in a lake that's coming from the ocean and you're bathing in the lake and you're like, oh wow, this lake it's really amazing that it comes from this amazing ocean? Or are you taking a little drink of water from that ocean and you're quenching your thirst from it? And the focus is then on this little bit of water that came out from the ocean. And the focus on the fact that you are quenching your thirst and you feel so satisfied with this feeling that you have now, that feeling that you have of quenching your thirst from this water, that feeling is not the water. That feeling is, yes, it comes from the water and you've quenched your thirst due to the water, but it's not the water itself. And it's not the same thing as like acknowledging like, oh, wow, I am basking in this water. I'm receiving from the water, right? So let's get into how the Alter Rebbe explains all of this. And another disclaimer, I give this disclaimer almost every single day these days on the podcast. We're still in the middle of Essay 4 of Kuntres Acharon, which is really, it's known. This section is notorious for being like the hardest section of Tanya. So there's a lot of Kabbalah in it. There's a lot of intricate details. I'm doing my best to try to understand these concepts as best as possible and give these things over to you. Any mistakes I make are my own, obviously. And if you ever notice an error that I make in explaining any of these concepts, please bring it to my attention. I welcome comments on the YouTube. Any thoughts that you have about this, anything you want to explore further, I'd love to have these ideas open for more discussion. And I think that the biggest takeaway that I'm taking from learning this section of the Tanya is just how deep Chassidus is and how many things there are to explore and how many layers there are, and layers upon layers upon layers. And these terms, while we think we have a grasp of the term, like the term neshama that's going to come up today, we might think, oh, I know what that means, but then there's like another layer to it that we uncover, and it's like, oh, that's another way that we can look at it. So, okay, so for today, as we mentioned, so we're still in the middle of Essay 4 of Kuntres Acharon, and we've been discussing this whole dynamic between keeping the mitzvahs, between our intellectually generated love and fear of God, and between studying Torah, and how all of these things relate to one another. What is one better than the other? In what way is it better or superior or different or whatever? And we kind of came to this conclusion that there's a very big advantage to keeping mitzvahs, to performing mitzvahs, over just generating a sense of love and fear of God, because generating a sense of love and fear of God is a very subjective thing, and it's very much dependent upon me, and there's me and there's my love and fear of God, versus when I actually do a mitzvah, what I'm doing is I'm tapping into God's will in an unadulterated format. This is God said do this thing, so I do that thing, and I'm attaching myself to God's actual will. I'm not just like, creating my own ideas about who God is and whatever it is, even if those ideas are based on the Torah. There's something a little bit more pure about doing the mitzvahs. And then we took this logic a little bit further, and we said that this applies not only to actual performance of the mitzvahs, but there's something to this even if we just learn about the laws of the Torah. Because when we learn about the laws of the Torah, especially if it's for the sake of performing the laws, then this creates a similar kind of effect. But then this got into a deeper discussion about what about like those, okay, that's all well and good if we learn about the positive laws of the Torah that have to do with practically doing these laws, but does this apply also to the prohibitions? What about prohibitions that are extremely theoretical in nature and that most likely will not apply to us? How do these actually, can we say that these two have a similar effect to doing the mitzvahs? And do they also have this kind of like unadulterated, unfiltered, give us this unadulterated, unfiltered connection in a way that love and fear of God cannot? So today we're exploring this further, and we're going to talk about the difference between love and fear of God, intellectually generated love and fear of God, and learning about the halachas. So we're going to begin our discussion today by talking about how this intellectually love and fear of God is ultimately, it's coming from a place that involves more creation. It's more hidden. It has to do with created beings, whether we're talking about angels or people there is somebody who loves, there is somebody who fears, which implies that there's a difference, which implies that there's a creation that is having feelings towards the creator, which is not the case, as we'll see, when it comes to the halachas. So there's a difference here between intellectually generated love and fear of God and halachas. So let's see how the Alter Rebbe explains all of this. So let's get into the text. As mentioned, we are in the middle of Essay 4 in Kuntres Acharon. So the springboard for this discussion is actually the cliffhanger, which we were left on in yesterday's episode. So you can go back and listen to that if you need a review. Where yesterday we started talking about this idea of learning Torah and about the great effect learning Torah can have, especially if we learn about the mitzvahs. So because we learned about we've been discussing this whole idea of the great power that happens when we perform mitzvahs using physical objects. And then we spoke about how even if we don't actually perform the mitzvahs, but even just the mere learning about these physical mitzvahs, it can have a very similar effect. But the end of yesterday's section left us with a question where the Alter Rebbe said that while this logic seems to ring true when it comes to the positive commandments, like when we learn about positive commandments that we intend to perform, okay, so we're learning about it even if we're not performing it in the moment, so it makes sense that it would have a similar effect. But what about learning about the prohibitions, especially if we learn about the prohibitions that have zero applicability to us? We know that we're never going to encounter them. They're just not practical for our lives. How do these create a similar effect? And if so, how does this happen? And so now this is where we begin today. So today the Alter Rebbe says that there's actually something that they all have in common, whether we're learning about the positive laws or the negative prohibitions of the Torah. So what is it? So first, we're going to contrast this with love and fear, and we're going to talk about intellectually generated love and fear. So the intellectually generated love and fear of the angels is in an aspect of creation ex nihilo. And to be specific, we can say that it's an aspect of the nefesh and the ruach of the worlds of Bria, Yitzira, and Asiya, which if you've been following along, then the Bria, Yitzira, and Asiya, these are the three lower worlds, and these are the worlds where creation happens, which contrasts with Atzilus, which is the world of emanation. So there's a disconnect between the world of Atzilus and the three lower worlds. So the Alter Rebbe is saying that the world of angels, which we think of as very, very high and lofty, and yes, the angels love and fear God very much, yet they are found within this world, these worlds of Bria, Yitzira, and Asiya. That's the realm they're in. So thus, they're considered to be creations of God. They're something separate from God. But when we talk about the details of the halachas, by contrast, these are the drawing down of the supernal chokhmah of the emanator himself, which becomes vested within physicality. And this is very different than the type of vestment that happens when the supernal wisdom becomes vested within the intellectually generated love and fear. Why? Because when God's supernal chokhmah becomes vested within intellectually generated love and fear of God, this vestment is a type of vestment that totally conceals God. And it's likened to the type of concealment that is found here in this physical earth that we live in comparison to the supernal wisdom that's found within it. As it is written, Kulam b'chokhmah asita, you made all with wisdom. That's from Tehillim chapter 104, verse 24. So basically, just to explain that a little bit. So we know that everything in the world was created through Chokhmah. Chokhmah is the source of all of creation. We've spoken about this many times in the Tanya. However, here we are in this physical reality. The Chokhmah is not apparent here. It's very, very, very much concealed. And it's concealed so much to the point that it's concealed in such a way that the way it's explained in Hasidic terminology, as the Alter Rebbe explains it here, is it's the chitzonius of the kelim of Malchus of Atzilus that is in the world of Asiya. So it's very technical, but basically it's the external of the external level of the vessels of Malchus of Atzilus as it's found in Asiya, which basically what this translates to mean is that it's totally, totally concealed in the level of the Ruach and the Nefesh, which are the two lower levels of the soul of Asiya, of the world of Asiya, which is the lowest of all worlds, which is the world that we live in. And the Alter Rebbe says, so too is this level of concealment found in the world of Bria, which, yes, the world of Bria is the highest of all created worlds, but yet it's still totally concealed on the level of Ruach and Nefesh, which is the level, Ruach and Nefesh is the level of creations that are totally concealed and totally hide the creation within them. So, okay, so that's the end of the section. So it's a little bit cryptic, but the basic takeaway that we want to take away from here is that the Alter Rebbe is contrasting Torah with intellectually generated love and fear of God, whether we're talking about angels who have this love and fear of God or humans that have this intellectually generated love and fear of God. That as lofty as love and fear generated by an angel or by a human can be, it's still very much within the realm of, it's still subjective. Why? Because these things fall into the category of creations. These are things that are separate from God. On a simple level, the way that we can understand this is that there's God, and then if there's a person who's loving God, that automatically implies that there's a person and God, and they're two separate things. Versus when it comes to learning Torah, it's not the same thing. It's not like, oh, there's the Torah and then there's the person learning Torah. No, when we're learning Torah, we're actually tapping into God's wisdom itself in a way that's undiluted. It's not our own wisdom that we're learning. It's not like we're not just like making up these ideas. We're actually learning godly wisdom, which is something which is beyond ourselves. And now the Alter Rebbe contrasts this with the actual halachas. When it comes to the actual laws, the learning of the Torah, the radiance of chokhmah that shines within them radiates in a way that is revealed. And when we say that it becomes vested within the world of Asiya, because the world of Asiya is this physical world we live in, it's only by way of a passage. In Hebrew, a ma'avar, it means. So we're going to explore what that means, a ma'avar. So it's basically what the Alter Rebbe is saying is that, like, yes, you know, we learn Torah, but when we learn about these different laws, these halachas, they relate to our physical world. So there is a relationship to physicality, which is a very concealed world, but the relationship, the way that it transfers over, that the chokhmah passes through, is in a way of just like a passage. It's not vested in a sense of concealment, as we'll see. So one way that we can understand this, says the Alter Rebbe, is when we look at a holiday. So when we look at like a Yom Tov holiday, it's taught that the chesed of Atzilus becomes totally vested within the chesed of Bria, which vivifies our world at that time through passing through the levels of chesed of Yetzirah and Asiya, which is also called a vestment at that time, like a garment at that time. And it needs to be called like a garment, or otherwise it wouldn't relate to our world at all. So just that's, again, very technical there. So just the basic idea is that there's a concept that that our world is usually vivified by the world of Asiya, as we've learned, right? It's actually taught that the land of Israel is usually vitalized by the world of Yetzirah, which is a little bit higher. But then what happens on Yom Tov is we actually get this like higher radiance, and we're getting a radiance from the level of Chesed of Bria. And so the little point that Alter Rebbe is making here is that the way that this happens on Yom Tov is that the level of Chesed of Bria actually vivifies the world. And even though, yes, it has to pass through the levels of Chesed of Yetzirah and Chesed of Asiya, then it's only passing through by way of a passage. It's not. This doesn't represent like an actual concealment. So we're getting pure, complete Chesed of Bria on holiday, which actually is coming from the Chesed of Atzilus, says the Alter Rebbe. So okay, so that's all well and good. However, we do know that there is a concealment that happens, because it's like, when we've all had Yom Tov. Yes, there's a very special feeling on Yom Tov. Maybe we feel a little extra level of holiness or whatever, but do we actually feel, God? Like, is it like, how much are we actually feeling this? There is a certain amount of concealment that happens because we are physical beings after all. We're here in the physical world. And so there's a concealment that happens in our world, and it even conceals the level of Chesed of Asiya, which is the lowest world, but it's the Chesed of that lowest world. So basically, like, anytime we're dealing with this physical world, so even when we're talking about the halachas in this physical world, again, as I've mentioned, it's like when we do these different halachas, we light Shabbos candles, we put on tefillin or whatever, it's like we don't see God at the moment when we're doing it, right? It might give us a nice feeling, but we're not like actually seeing the godliness in it. So what do we mean that it's coming down in this way that is unadulterated, that is not concealed? So this is in terms of the law itself, which is not physical. Yes, we do the law with physical things, but the actual law itself, the actual halacha, this is God's will, which comes from the supernal chokhmah of God, whether we should be makel or whether we should be machmir, like whether we should say, yes, this is permitted, or no, we're not allowed to do this. So the actual law itself is not physical, and it's totally revealed. But just that it comes down, when it comes down here and becomes revealed in physical things, so then the way that we have to think about it is this is where the analogy of water comes in, is that it's descending from a very high place to a very low place, just like water descends from a very high place to a very low place. Just like if you, let's say, are in right near, if you're walking down in like some place in nature or something like that, and like you see a little trickle of water, you don't see necessarily where that water is coming from, but perhaps it's coming from a lake nearby that's receiving its water from a huge ocean. But all you see is that little trickle of water. And the truth is that little trickle of water is the same water that's found in that ocean. And so going back to halachos, so yes, the physical object that we perform the mitzvahs with does in fact conceal. So for example, the Alter Rebbe gives a couple of examples in halacha. One is, let's say, if somebody is supposed to be selling a cow in the marketplace, but then instead they sell a donkey, so that's like a very physical kind of halacha that involves physical cows and physical donkeys. Or there's also the idea of the prohibition of pigul, which we've mentioned before. Pigul is this idea of bringing sacrifices, and then there's an inappropriate thought that a person has when they bring this sacrifice, and that could actually make the sacrifice not kosher anymore. So all of these different types of halachas, they pretty much all involve physical objects that are used for all kinds of different things. Like there are many uses for donkeys and cows and all these things, right? So the donkey and the cow doesn't really manifest godliness in and of itself, but yet the law itself, with the reasoning behind it, this itself is something else. This itself is why is it more pure and unadulterated? Is because it's from the aspect of, this gets a little technical, of malchus, of bria and yetzirah, of the aspect of neshama. So this is introducing us to a certain concept, which we're going to be talking about more in detail tomorrow, which is this idea of the neshama level. So this word neshama might be pretty familiar to you guys, and I kind of hinted at it in the introduction that there's more to it than meets the eye. But one way to, a lot of these terms in Chassidus, again, are very... There's a lot of relativity. It's like, what do we mean by neshama here? What do we mean by neshama there? There are a lot of terms that can be used in many different ways. So one way to understand the term neshama is that every world that we're talking about, and every, whether we're talking about the world of Asiya or Yetzirah or Bria or Atzilus, has different layers of layers of soul to it. There's the layer of the neshama, there's the layer of the ruach, and there's the layer of the nefesh, which are the two lower ones. So now the layer of the neshama is actually the source of it, where it comes from, is from the malchus of the world before it. And what comes from the neshama is the nefesh and the ruach, which it vivifies. So the neshama sort of serves as this intermediary between that which is above it and that which is below it. Now, the other thing to know about the neshama is made up of the 10 spheres. So when we talk about like the 10 spheres of each world, this is the neshama level of each world. And so within those 10 spheres of each world, one of the spheres, the lowest of all spheres, is malchus, right? So now let's get back to the text, and now we can understand a little bit better, is that when we talk about the halachos, then what we're saying is that the halachos are the level of malchus of either Bria or Yetzirah, so they're related to two different worlds of Bria or Yetzirah, of the aspect of the neshama. So we're talking about the neshama level within these two worlds of Bria and Yetzirah, and we're specifically talking about the level of malchus, which within each one of those things. And since we're talking about the level of neshama, then this level of neshama is pure elokus. It's pure godliness. That's the special power of neshama within each world, is it's pure and unadulterated godliness that descends from world to world. But because we're talking about the level of malchus within the neshama of these worlds, this malchus, it's the lowest of the levels, that vivifies and gives rise to the nefesh and ruach of these lower worlds, of the Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiyah. Now, what are the nefesh and ruach of these lower worlds, of specifically the Bria and Yetzirah of these lower worlds? Well, this brings us back to what we've been discussing in previous episodes. This is the love and fear of the malachim and of the souls, of the angels and the souls, and their chabads, their intellect, which comes about something from nothing, so meaning they're created beings, so the creation of their minds. And so thus, since the whole source of this love and fear of the souls and love and fear of the angels comes from this neshama, they're like totally dependent upon the neshama level. This, with the analogy of the water, what does this water do? What does this neshama do? What do these halachas do? They quench their thirst. They quench the thirst of the love and fear of these angels and of these souls. And it quenches their thirst before it descends down into this world. So before the halachas actually come into this world and are still coming down, like they're still in this like higher state, then it quenches their thirst. And also after it comes down into this lower world. So even after it comes down into this lower world, into this world of Asiyah, it's still considered to be higher than the level of Chochmah Bina Das of Asiyah, and even higher than the level of Neshama, which is godliness. So that's super technical and very, very cryptic. But the basic idea, that's the end of the section today. But the basic idea to keep in mind with all of this is that is this analogy of water. So it's like the Torah, specifically the laws, the halachas, are like water that descends from a very high place to a very low place. And the channel of descent for this is through this level, which we call the neshama, specifically the neshama of the worlds of Bria and Yetzirah. And to be even more specific, it's the level of malchus within these levels of neshama. And so since it goes through this channel of neshama is very different than the levels of nefesh and ruach, because nefesh and ruach, they are considered more to be creations, versus neshama is more considered to be more of this like just emanation. It's not filtered in the same way. And so since it's coming down like this water that's unfiltered, that comes just straight down, then the nefesh and ruach levels, which are the levels through which we experience this love and fear of God, whether we're talking about angels or whether we're talking about souls, then this love and fear of God, because its source comes from this higher neshama level, it quenches their thirst. So that's the end of the section today. It's very technical, I know, and there's, like I said, there's a lot more that needs to be explored, that can be looked into and things like that. And tomorrow we're going to get even deeper into the weeds with all of this, but stick with it, and we'll continue along this journey together, and I will speak to you then. Thanks for listening to the It Is Taught podcast, hosted by Sarit Switzer. This podcast is dedicated in loving memory of my maternal grandfather, Avraham Yitzchak ben Binyamin HaKohen of blessed memory. Music by Shoshana. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to support the show, please share it with others and subscribe on YouTube, Apple iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And make sure to leave us a 5-star review. To find out more about the It Is Taught project, including more information on my soon-to-be published book, please visit our website, itistaught.com. To catch the latest from me, follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Looking forward to speaking with you tomorrow, and until then, have a great day.